Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 77 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Rachel Kodanaz for this episode. And Rachel was actually my guest way back in episode 38, where we discussed returning to work after loss, and that was the subject of her first book. And Rachel herself is a widowed parent. Her husband died when she was 31, and her daughter was 2 years old. But today we talked about the subject of her third book, which is called Finding Peace, One Piece at a Time. And it's really about the daunting task of thinking about what to do with a loved one's possessions after they die, which, I think we probably all know can be tricky emotionally, it can be tricky logistically, it can just seem too overwhelming. I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about, how to do it, or how do you know if you're ready to do it, all these sorts of things. So I think you'll really enjoy my discussion about this with Rachel, and many thanks to her for coming back on the show and speaking with us today. So I hope you enjoy my discussion with Rachel Kodanaz. Hey, so before we get to today's guest, I want to tell you guys that Blue Apron has a special offer for listeners of the Widowed Parent Podcast. Blue Apron, if you haven't heard of it, it's a food box delivery service, basically. I actually subscribed to it for quite a long time after my husband Dennis died, and we had a meal train for almost a year, which was wonderful. And at the end of that, I was stuck. Like, how do I, now I'm a widowed parent. I've got 2 kids. I'm busy. And I was getting takeout all the time because I was like, how do I cook? People have been bringing meals for so long. I was, the planning was killing me. So I actually subscribed to Blue Apron, and they brought a box of food each week, and you could select, I think it's 2 or 3 or 4 meals per week. They bring the ingredients, they're all portioned out, they have the recipe cards with instructions and pictures, lots of variety of food. It was actually really cool to do the cooking with my kids and have an activity to do together, and to help them learn some cooking skills. But most of all, I loved it because I didn't have to plan. I didn't mind so much opening up the box and preparing the food. I minded all the planning and the shopping and all that. So anyway, I just actually resubscribed, and I'm going to try it for a while again because I think that would be really helpful. And I wanted to let you guys know that I just signed up for an affiliate program with them, and I have a special link, and they just let me know that they're having this sale where you get $80 off basically your first month, because you get $20 off each box for your first 4 boxes. So I'd encourage you to check it out. You can go to jennylisk.com/blueapron. That's JENNYLISK.com/blueapron. All one word, BLUEAPRON. Check it out and let me know what you think. All right, now on to today's guest. My guest today is Rachel Kodanaz. Rachel is a widowed mom, and she's the author of 3 books on grief-related topics: Living with Loss One Day at a Time, Grief in the Workplace, and her most recent book, Finding Peace, One Piece at a Time. And if this sounds familiar, it may be because I interviewed Rachel way back in episode 38, and that one was specifically about returning to work after loss. So today, I'm very glad to welcome Rachel back to the show to talk about the topic of her third book. So this will be about determining what to do regarding a loved one's possessions after they die, which seems like it might be especially timely right now with so many people home during this pandemic, and maybe having some time to tackle this project if it's something they've been dreading or otherwise not had time to take on. So Rachel's joining us today from her home in Denver, Colorado. And Rachel, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be back today and talking about a subject that means a lot to me.
Oh, good. Yes, great. Well, we'll dive right in here. But before we do that, actually, I will put a link to episode 38 in the show notes, and I encourage people to go back and listen to your story and your journey and your reflections as a widowed parent of a very young child. But can you just remind us, kind of set the stage here, how did you end up as a widowed parent? How old was your daughter, and that sort of thing?
So I was widowed a while ago, but I was 31, my husband was 32, and my daughter was 2. And at the time, it was just a sudden death. My husband walked out of work. He was a terrific athlete, and he just collapsed in the parking structure. It was arrhythmia, missed a heartbeat. He couldn't recover, didn't have a chance, would never expected this to happen to me. But just like many of your listeners, there's, so many people that have had sudden loss as well that are just hard to imagine. But I've been speaking on the subject for, as you said earlier, for a long time, 20-something years. I just learned a lot along the journey, and I like to be a little bit more practical, rather than I can't change what happened to us, but what I can change is how we look at it, and I'm here to help.
Super. Okay, great. Well, speaking of practical, that reminds me, can you tell us, I think that, before your husband died, tell us a little bit about your view of possessions. I think you were maybe more on the practical side of things.
I was, and it was when I was writing the latest book, Finding Peace One Piece at a Time, I struggled at defining what a possession was, because for me, I had a car. It was to get me from point A to point B. My bicycle was the same thing, point A to point B. And even though I was a terrific state champion swimmer, I didn't really care about I didn't think of the awards that I received as anything more than another day in the life of Rachel Kodanaz. I just didn't think of them as true meaning. And then Rod passed away, and all of a sudden, everything around me became just something that was a possession, something like I had to get closer to. And when I wrote my book, I can explain that to you, Jenny, and people can hear it on the podcast and say, oh, I know what she's talking about, because we're widowed together. But it was hard to explain that to somebody that isn't in our shoes, that has a chance to sort through and thin and clean out some stuff. And so I was really taken back of how to explain to someone what a possession was.
Mm-hmm. Starting at that most basic level. And one of the things you mentioned, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this, that personal possessions tell a beautiful story of a person's life.
They do. And so I think we lose a grip on that a little bit. We get very caught up, especially in the first, let's say, 6 months of our widowhood. We get caught up on the pain of being left and being the survivor and being a widow. We lose track a little bit of, at least for me and the people that I've worked with, you lose track of that beautiful life that we did. It was cut short, no question about it, but it was that beautiful life that needed to be celebrated. And I think the possessions tell the story. Again, as I shared earlier about just like being a swimmer, and I didn't think that those possessions would mean anything to anybody. But then after Rod passed away, everything meant something. And I explain in the book, I talk about when I'm defining a possession, I talk about when I came home from the hospital, I found out that he was gone. I went into the bathroom and I was crying really hard, and I was sitting on the floor, and I looked up and I saw his toothbrush. And I thought to myself, what the heck do you do with a toothbrush? And when I present, that's where I get some tears, is because you have to understand what it's like to come home, to understand that it's not just some gross thing that was in somebody's mouth, that it is, oh my gosh, it was something in my loved one's mouth. And his, it's really hard to explain to someone unless you kind of walk the journey. And that's when I really realized that everything around me talked Rod. Everything around me talked his behaviors, his process for the day, everything. So I just kind of went after it.
Yeah. Well, and so I was going to ask next, why sorting through or thinking about or dealing with or making decisions about possessions can be overwhelming, but maybe you just answered that.
Well, it's interesting because I really, now that I'm working with people and I'm less emotional and I have a process, I don't think of it as so overwhelming. And I don't even think about it when I work with somebody that has been widowed, or even somebody that's lost parents. I don't get overwhelmed anymore because I put some practicality around it and I've made it logical. I mean, both of us, you and I, were both by profession, IT, so we're kind of a little bit on the logical side. And when I put some logic on it, it just shapes the emotions of it. And what I learned about, for me anyway, I didn't have to do anything right away. I was very fortunate. I didn't have to move. I didn't have to get rid of stuff. I didn't have to do what a lot of people have to do. So I loved having Rod's clothing and especially suits in his closet. I loved it. I loved being able to wake up in the morning when I got dressed and feel the warmth of it. I didn't see it as traumatic. And I didn't have to clean it out right away. So his possessions were just tearful, don't get me wrong, but they were really warm. I didn't realize how warm they were until I started working with other people, but they really comforted me. His eyeglasses, if we weren't on a podcast and we were in a presentation, I'd like to show a couple things that I've saved, and we could talk later in this call about how I saved them. But I could look at stuff in the box that I have and some of the stuff, and 25 years later, I get the warm fuzzies in my belly as if it was yesterday. So for me, I didn't find it really hard. I found it just warm, just really warm.
I imagine that this might be something that varies by person. I guess, have you worked with people who maybe have the opposite reaction, for whom having possessions around is I don't know, the opposite, like not comforting or not helpful?
So for some people, it's amazing how fast they want to do it, if that's kind of what you're asking. So some people just can't handle it. So what I couldn't handle was pictures all over the house of our happy days. So I had to turn those down, face down. But I didn't, that was mine that I just couldn't see his face, but the belongings were hugging and comforting to me. I don't know why, but I've had other people that need to clean out immediately. There's anger, and the anger isn't necessarily at the person that died. It's anger at the situation. So what happens is they just think that if they could get rid of everything and get it out the door, that the whole situation will go away, but it won't. And 6 months later, they're going to want to sort through it and do things. So what I try to do is when somebody calls me, or I know of somebody that's in one of those panic modes, so to speak, and I don't really want to use that word because it's a different emotion for everybody, but the feeling that they need to get rid of it, I say to them, you've got a friend, a family member, let them take it. And I suggest let them box it up, let them put it in trash bags, whatever they want, take it away, because that person is going to be ready to see it again or to sort through it on their own terms. You are absolutely correct. We all have different emotions at different times. Maybe because my daughter was 2 and I didn't want to change my life with her. Maybe I didn't, because I didn't have to move or do anything. I don't know. But I do think some people, they don't find comfort right away. I do believe they find comfort later on with certain things. So
maybe
I just
in that
want to be
case,
careful.
Yeah, like get it out of sight, but not like gone, so that then you could maybe deal with it down the road at some point when it becomes, absolutely. That makes sense. It also sounds like, maybe people should think, well, there's not one, like, I shouldn't be trying to find the right answer here. It's like, what's going to be the right approach for me? What's going to be most comforting for me in all this?
I agree. And that actually is a really good point to bring up, is that people external to a fellow widower will push you a little bit, and their expectations and their thoughts around what happens when somebody loses a spouse is different than what actually happens behind your front door. So one might perceive it to be, if you clean out the closet, if you move the stuff, if you get rid of this, if you do this, if you do that, you're going to be better. But you and I both know that we've been widowed for a while, and it gets softer, but it's still there, and it will always be there, whether it's in your children, whether it's your in-laws, whether it's a memory, whether it's a sadness that you watch on TV. It's always there. We just have a better way of handling it right now. So when I go back to the possessions, when people push you to do things, they think it's going to be over and done. They don't see the other side of it. One, that it can be comforting, and 2, that you're going to feel this way forever. It's just going to be softer. So it is quite different.
Well, and so this is reminding me, you talk a little bit in the book about your husband's running shoes and your experience with them, including the experience of visitors to your house regarding the running shoes. Can you tell us about that a little bit? So
my husband the family was runners. That baby jogger went out every single day, and that was in the infancies of baby joggers. And when we got home from the hospital, my daughter, for like the first 3 days, I got to say it's weeks, it wasn't even 3 days, she would jump on the couch and say, "Daddy out running, Daddy home soon. Daddy out running, Daddy home soon." And running was just a part of our lives. And when his running shoes were by the front door, I wanted to say to her, you need to be a little smarter, honey. The shoes are right there. But, she was 2. And there was something about the shoes being at the front door. I would say hello to them when I came in. I would say goodbye to them when I left. And I don't know what it was. It just gave me some great comfort of I wasn't alone in the house. And again, you really have to be widowed to understand, or maybe if you lost a parent or a brother or sister that you might feel this way. But it was just a comfort that I had. And, after it was like 18 months into it, somebody said to me, Rachel, you need to really move those shoes. And I said to them, why do I need to move those shoes? And they said, because it's just awkward when you come in the house. I'm like, well, then don't come in my house. I mean, it was pretty simple. Like, okay, this is where I am. But I got to tell you this great story. So Friday, a couple days ago, I did a presentation for a Grief Network Alliance in Kansas City. And after, it was a Zoom because of what's going on. I was supposed to physically be there, but that obviously didn't work out. And afterwards, this gentleman sent me a picture. I just couldn't believe this whole story. He said to me, you touched me in a way that I wish I knew you 6 months ago when I was cleaning out my house. And it wasn't a death. It was just cleaning out his house. And he went on to tell me in this picture and tell the story that when Harry Truman died, Bess hung his coat on the hook next to hers. And it was so that she felt like he was there when she came home, that both their coats were there. And I was like, yeah, that's good. That's a lot of years ago. But it's great to know that we do find comfort in these possessions, and there's no reason to get rid of them. We don't have a problem when our parents pass us down some kind of legacy when they pass away or even when they're still alive. But for some reason, people believe, and I'm not saying necessarily you and I, but people believe that when someone passes untimely death of a spouse or something, that you need to get rid of these things. But why do you have to get rid of them? Even if you're repartnering, it's part of who you are.
Okay, so and that's a great story about Harry Truman and Bess Truman. So thank you for sharing that. So I think this leads us to, if I'm doing air quotes here, get rid of is the wrong word. There's still the topic of, I don't know what you want to call it, like dealing with or deciding what to do with or how to handle possessions. So I guess how would you suggest that we begin thinking about this topic?
So all I'm here today is to plant seeds. I'm not going to tell you what you should and shouldn't do, because I think the worst thing to do somebody is to tell them what they shouldn't do. So if I were to suggest to you when, where, how, why, I'd like to put into your head the word thinning. I'd like to take away cleaning out. So I have presented this for at least 10 years at Camp Widow, and I've called it everything from cleaning out the closet, and people would come up to me, I would have come to your lecture or your workshop, but I already cleaned out the closet. It has nothing to do with the closets. The closets are the easy thing. It's everything else that's associated, connected. So the first thing that I want to say is don't think of it as cleaning out. Think of it as thinning. That you're thinning it out. And I like to use this example, probably over cliched, but if you have 100, let's say in the case of you and I, we lost a husband. If your husband had 100 t-shirts, you don't have to clean out his t-shirts. You have to thin his t-shirts. Because if you get it down to 25, look what you've done. And then I've been with so many widows, helping them, widowers, I use that word, just the word widows, helping them sort through or trying to figure out what to keep, what not to. I asked 6 questions, and all of a sudden they could get from a big pile to a smaller pile, because when they start telling me the story, I never even liked that shirt. It was too tight on him. I didn't like the one he wore it. That one had a spot on it, and I don't know why he didn't get rid of that. There's conversations that happen. So by me asking the 6 questions, Jenny, you're making decisions that you don't even know you're making.
Okay. Well, so now you've got me interested. So tell me more about these 6 questions.
Well, they're just more tell the story behind it. Where'd you get it? There's no set questions. It's just making you think of the item differently. Where were you? Was that from a vacation? Was that a gift? I mean, I could come up with a bunch of them, but it's really more of what is the meaning behind that possession.
Gotcha.
And if you get down to there's no meaning behind the possession, then guess what? it's easy to thin that piece out.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So I'm not sure now if it would make more sense to ask you about the magic of the 6 piles or to ask you about the 10 essentials. Which way should we go first?
Let's go the 10 essentials, and we don't necessarily have to do all 10 of them. We could do a couple of them because we'll see what time we have just to help the people a little bit. And I've already pretty much kind of talked about some of them, but I'll bring them together. They'll make sense. And if you want to go in order, we can. If you prefer to just randomly ask.
Why don't you start us off with number 1?
Okay, number 1 is eliminate all excuses. Okay, so
that's probably yeah.
So the excuse is, I don't have time. I presented to this one woman. She said to me, she was in the audience, and she asked the question afterwards, and I knew where she was going with it, because she said that she couldn't find any place to donate this, and she couldn't do this, and there was all these, I can't. And I just looked at her and I said, are you ready? And she started crying, and she said, no. So when I say eliminate all excuses, if you're not ready, you're not ready. So if you cannot eliminate the excuses, I don't have time, and believe me, you're all home right now, so you do have time, is that if I don't have time, or I don't know what to do with it, I don't know what to keep, which we're going to talk a little bit about the magic of 6 piles that will help the listeners understand what that means. Just eliminate the excuses. And if you can't eliminate the excuses, you are not ready. Make sense?
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm not ready isn't an excuse that you're trying to eliminate, but it's the more of the like, I don't know what to do with this stuff, or this seems logistically overwhelming, or that kind of stuff that you want to try to eliminate those excuses.
Yes, but if you said to me, I really want to do this, but I don't know how, or I've been thinking about doing this, most of the time I can guarantee you, I don't want to use that word, but most of the time I can guarantee you are ready. You just don't know how to start. So
Gotcha.
As you try to eliminate the excuses, and someone like me doesn't let you eliminate, like you're keeping those, I can probably look at you and say to you, you know what? Let's just start in the garage. You know what? Or let's like and I'm going to talk about that in a minute in the 10 essentials of where to begin. But just starting somewhere, if someone you trust other than a family member, and because sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, if you could find somebody that you trust to help you, you will eliminate the excuses. Because remember, we're thinning, we're not cleaning. And so I would remind you over and over and over again, you're not cleaning out. We are thinning some of the stuff to feel a rhythm.
Gotcha. Okay. So the next 10 essential is about triggers.
So I'll talk about that for a minute. So my trigger was, it's just kind of fascinating how it came about, is I had a visitor that came to town. His name was Chris. At the time my husband died, everybody wore suits. And so I had a closet full of really nice suits. And Chris tiptoed, eggshelled, walking on eggshells, said to me, he was visiting, he said, I got this interview. Is there any way that you'd feel comfortable if I borrowed one of Rod's suits? And I said, oh my, in 1 second, I said to him, take them all. He goes, what do you mean take them all? I said, I have no emotional connection to his suits. I have no idea what I would do with them anyway. That was my trigger. I accepted it. And from that moment on, I was able to not clean out, but kind of sort through and decide what I wanted to get rid of. Because we're a running family, anything in the running department wasn't anything that I could like get rid of right away, whether they were t-shirts, shorts, socks, his shoes at the front door. But that caused a trigger that when I emptied that part of the closet, I had to move some things because I didn't want to leave that open hole. So by doing that, it set me off that says, I'm going to be okay. I can do this. Most triggers happen, though, are one, and I talk about some of these in the book just to give examples, is winter's coming and you have too much stuff in the garage and you want to get the car in the garage. That could be a trigger. Looking for a paper tax return, something. That could be a trigger of going into the office and looking for something, and next thing you know, you've got everything on the floor. There could be trigger that if somebody, a family member, wants to get something, wants a memorabilia. That could be, okay, what would I give them? So whatever the trigger is, accept it.
So these triggers are like triggers to action, not like triggers like something you put a trigger warning on, like trigger to emotional distress.
Actually, thank you. And I wish you were around to read my book or to help me edit the book, because trigger to action would have probably been a really good word. It's the trigger to say, I can do this.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you mentioned that there's some pitfalls that we should try to avoid.
Doing too much too fast, asking the wrong people to help you, taking on a room that, you don't want to do, the room that you walk in and out of every day. Like, don't start in the bedroom. You could start, like mine happened to be the closet, but if you're really not ready to do this, don't. I think office is really hard, because when you start reading and seeing signatures and stuff. So just when I say the pitfalls, just try not to get yourself in trouble and emotional distress. Just try to be calm about it.
Gotcha. Okay. And well, that sounds like it also relates to maybe prioritizing where to begin, picking like low-hanging fruit kind of stuff.
I suggest that. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but remember, we're not living in a perfect world. So if you have the choice, less emotional location, less
Gotcha.
like a more logical. So this hasn't helped the widows, but what I try to explain to when you lose a parent, start with something in the garage, or if you have their boxes, they've been in the garage so you don't even know what's in it, right? So start with the stuff, and the problem, start with the stuff that you don't think you might have a emotional connection to. The problem with a spouse, at least for me anyway, when I started digging in, and I do talk about this in the book as well, I found his grad school papers, and I put them in, we're going to talk about my rod box, but I put them in the rod box, and I even admit in the book I've never read them, but I still have them because I couldn't throw them away, and I didn't want to scan them. And every time I look at them, I see this typewriter, and it just brings something different. So
yeah, and your daughter might want to read them someday.
And I probably want to read them someday. Let's put that in there.
Maybe during the pandemic, while we're all home, and
Right.
Okay, so, and I do want to hear about the rod box, but let's just continue a little bit here. You mentioned that it might be helpful to assemble a team. Can you give us some thoughts on what might or might not be helpful in that regard?
Okay, so this is probably, of all the 10 essentials, this is one, and I've got one more that are my favorites in there. It's just really hard to do alone. Okay, so just take this out of a death for a minute. Just take when you're cleaning out your closets, you're like, oh, maybe I'll keep that sweater, and it didn't look so good on me, or, maybe I'll get the shirt to wear under it. So think of what we do with our own stuff that we have trouble making decisions and what to do with it. And I paid a lot of money for it, I want to keep it, or whatever it is, right? Or as I talked earlier about my swimming, that keeping trophies and that kind of stuff. What do you keep? What don't you keep? So what I like about building a team is that you're not alone doing that. So when you have these behind the scenes thoughts, you could actually share them with somebody. You can get somebody else's wisdom. So what I consider to be the team is, I think there needs to be somebody that could be straightforward with you, to say, the 6 questions that I asked, or the 5 questions, where'd it come from? What do you get pleasure of it? Does it feel good? Do you remember the story behind it? Was that something that he had or she had before you got married? That automatically thins some things out, right? That automatically gets rid of it, but somebody could ask those questions. The second thing is that I think there needs to be someone that just make sure that you're not working too long, that you've eaten, that you've got outside of the sunshine, that you've taken a break, you've stretched your legs, you've stretched your back. I call them the mom, so to speak, but somebody that just makes sure your well-being is good, because once you get going, you could get caught up on a lot of emotional things. And just by that person saying, can you tell me a story behind, just asking a question, it just changes your outlook a little bit. I think there needs to be a runner, and that's somebody that when you're ready to make a decision, you run it right outside the door. If you're waffling, don't run it, but just somebody that takes the trash bags. I just recently helped somebody, before all this happened, I recently helped somebody, and I was working with them, and I implemented my having a runner, like just one of her friends that was there. And every time we filled a bag, I said, could you put that in the SUV? Can you put that in the trunk? Can you bring that? Don't put it in the garage, put it in the car, because I'll take it when I leave. If that was the type of situation we were working through. So I think there should be a runner. I think there should be a researcher. And this all could be the same person. And I list these, you could be everything. Like if I helped you, Jenny, I could be all those roles. but it's still part of a team. So somebody that researches what goes on with, for example, of maybe you found your spouse has, or your partner has a collection that you're not interested. Maybe it's sports memorabilia. Maybe it's sporting equipment. Maybe it is a coin collection. Maybe it is whatever it is, China, whatever you collected that you're no longer interested in. Somebody that could research it. Is it worth something? Should you keep it together? And I do talk about collections, but I know we won't have time today. Is, do you keep them together? Do you keep it apart? Just somebody that researches where would be the best way to drop it off. How do you get rid of the computer? That kind of stuff. So it's the researcher. So it's the person that is not talking to you every second, or you can make a list and ask your neighbor to do that. So when I say the team, it's not necessarily we're on a football field together, but we are emotionally.
And you get someone to reach out. Maybe you've got this now box of old electronics and you don't know the right way to dispose of them with complying with all the recycling laws and the lithium batteries and the yada, yada, yada. But you could say to somebody, can you figure out what to do with this stuff?
Ooh, what happened?
Oh, did I lose you?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we are in a pandemic here, and I think the whole world is on Zoom. So if we have a few glitches, listeners, apologies in advance. This is reminding me, actually, when right after my husband died, I had a ton of medication to get rid of because he was on hospice at home and he died here, and we had all the medications, some of which were serious, I don't know what class, whatever, big medications. And the hospice nurse was trying to tell me how to dispose of them, and I'm like, it's too much. And one of my friends, my good friend, stepped in and said, I will put all these in a bag and I will go figure out how to dispose of these. And I was like, thank you. Right.
That's your runner. But that's your runner, right? Your person.
Well, no, but she had to actually research, like, how do you dispose of morphine correctly? Or, like all these, things that I didn't. And the nurse was talking about coffee grounds to destroy the opioids so people didn't steal them out of the garbage. And I'm like, I can't handle it. Somebody else,
But it's the reason, like you said, the researcher and then the runner that takes it away. But so that's what I'm saying. Sometimes it could be the same person that does all the jobs. But, that's an interesting one because there's probably a lot of people that are listening that say, what do you do with that? Because it's not something, they tell you not to flush it down the toilet. They tell you not to put it in the water system. So it is something that you really, I'm sure most people do throw it away or put it in the water system of some sort. But it's interesting how that person, you will forever remember just sharing that experience, and you bonded. That's the other thing that I try to tell people. You're not asking for favors, for help to do this. You're bonding on a way that you would never bond otherwise.
Yeah. And I remember I'm pointing now, the listeners can't see it, but my bathroom that's right over there where all the medications were when he was sick, and standing in there with my friend and her saying, give it to me, I'll figure it out.
So can I just going to segue for a second? People say to me like the trigger or the thought or where to begin. I hear quite often when people are caregivers, the place to begin is to get rid of the hospital and the house.
Yes.
So you start remembering the life that was happy and not the life that was sick.
Yes.
And that's the second one I should have had you for when I was doing the book, is that they say that is the number one place for those who have been caregivers is to get the hospital out of the house. Yeah.
And that was, I had that bed out the same day. Like, I don't know who arranged for it to be picked up, the hospital bed and all the equipment and all the crap, like, I might have to beep that out. I don't know. Probably not.
No, you don't. Come on, this is life.
Well, no, I know. But, when you put it on iTunes, you have to rate if it's a clean show or no, I'm sure that's fine. But, I have had to beep a few things out of a few shows because you got to maintain that iTunes clean rating. A little podcast behind the scenes here. Okay, so let's continue. I think you mentioned that you had one other favorite of the 10 essentials.
Oh, yes. And this is called the elevator speech. And what I realized, I thought everybody in the world knew what an elevator speech was until I was given a talk to some hospice people. And because I come from business. So I have to explain, because I call it that in my book. And so what it really is the whole notion of an elevator speech is you get on the elevator on the ground floor and you could pitch your product by the time that you get to the floor that you're getting off. So you have 2 to 3 lines, you have 1 to 2, you have less than a minute, 30 seconds to share. So what I have found working with people, not just widows, but anybody that has had a significant loss, is that people tell them what they should and shouldn't do, and people tell them how they should, and if they cleaned out the stuff, and if they did this, and if they did that, they would recover. Again, there's nothing to get over, there's nothing to fix. So let's just use you and I. If I say to you, Jenny, have you cleaned out the closet? You have the opportunity to get very defensive to me because 1, you're not ready. 2, you're doing it. Who are you to tell me what to do and what not to do? You could get all those defense mechanisms start kicking up, right? And if you have an elevator speech and say, I've listened to this, this with Rachel and Jenny, we're talking on a podcast. I listened to it and she gave us these 10 essentials and then she gave us a magic of 6 piles. If that was the answer back when somebody said to me, how are you doing with your closets? I'm not going to get defensive. So if you get defensive, like when one of my sisters says to me, Rachel, how are you doing on that stuff? I'm going to get defensive. Who loses when you're defensive? You. My sister's not going to lose. You're going to lose because you're the one that's going to get all sad and your day's going to be just hijacked because you're going to go into an emotional state that you didn't want to go to. So I suggest to people to have an elevator speech. And it could be things like, I'm working on thinning out his clothes. That's all you have to say. Right. And then the person says, oh, great. Let me know if you need some help rather than, well, you should or you shouldn't. So I always suggest, I really push hard to come up with something that you have when somebody is going to ask you something that you have that's ready to come out immediately that says what you're doing with it. I'm sorting some things for my children. Whatever the sentence is, but just have it ready so you don't get defensive.
Okay. I love that. And, that seems like it could apply in so many different aspects of widowhood as well, depending on people's particular circumstances. If someone asks how your person died and you don't want to reveal that, or if someone asks, when are you going to start dating and you don't want to talk about that, or if someone asks whatever, having those kind of elevator speeches ready that you can just pull out addresses it and lets you move on without really getting derailed by whatever that was that person brought up.
Because that's excellent. Because 90% of the time when someone asks you if you're dating, it's not to be nosy. They just want to know how you are. And really what they want you is back out there. And what they don't realize, depending on what age you are widowed, a lot of times you don't want to go back out there because you're okay being just Rachel or being just Jenny or being just Sue or whatever for now, But so having something ready just always just helps you not get defensive. And we all get defensive. I don't, no matter what your personality is, we have a tendency, I think, collectively that we get defensive on something every once in a while.
Sure. Okay. So I'm anxious to hear about these 6 piles. Can you tell us about that?
So we could talk about these 6 piles somebody could drive cross country and you and I could keep talking about this listening to the podcast, but I'm going to do it I'm going to move a little bit on it. And then if you have specific questions, please feel free, I'll clarify, but to help with the time, I'm just going to kind of go through them a little quickly, give it a little bit of an example. So in writing the book and in my presentations, which came before the book, I always try to give my audiences something to walk away with that's tangible, not just, oh, I was at this session today. I liked it, or I just read this book. I'd like them to be able to quote something to the next round of people. So in this case, if somebody were to read my book, I would love for them to say, oh, to 3 other people, this magic of 6 piles, or the 10 essentials, or what a possession is, a takeaway. So what I try to do is to come up with a plan. It's not rocket scientist, but to come up with a plan that makes you have forward momentum, so to speak. So when I created this whole notion of the 6 piles, what do you do with something that you grab? Like, what do you do with this? Remember, we're thinning, we're not cleaning out. So the first pile would be, I'm keeping it. I know I want to keep it. It's something that I want. This is where that rod box comes in. Okay. It's gotten smaller over the years, but in there is his eyeglasses, his wallet, his driver's license, his passport, the pine cone, because I live in Colorado, we hiked up when we did a little memorial for him. The shoes my daughter's wearing, which we could talk about a different day, but the shoes my daughter was wearing when my husband passed away, his running hat. There's just some things in there that I open it, I feel him, I smell him, I touch him, I memorialize all of that. So that's the keep pile. This is specific that I'm going to share, specific to your audiences. If you have children, I used to say under 18, I've creeped it up because my daughter just turned 30 and she's still in a small apartment in a city. So I am creeping up a little bit with my opinion on this. But if you have children and or grandchildren, I think you need to decide for them what you should save. And I'm saying that because if you ask your children right now, Jenny, do they want this? They're going to say no. But when they get into their own house and their own bookshelf and their own their own dinner table, all of a sudden these items have a lot of meaning. So what I suggest in pile 1, which is the keep pile, is to keep things that you think your kids someday would want, or that you want to share the story. Make the decision for them. Don't let them make the decision.
Because if they're 8 or 13 or even 18, they may not be thinking about what they're going to want when they're 30, 40, or 50 that reminds them of their parent.
Correct. And in the case of, as I said, that I'm aging up on this presentation because my daughter is still in a very small apartment with her fiance who's 6'8", there's no space. So if I said to her, do you want that? I mean, she was 2, but if you want this, she would say, absolutely not. She wouldn't say, put it in she still has a room in the house, put it in my, because I do have a lot of her stuff here still. So I'm just saying is to be careful of that. So the first pile is you're going to keep. The second pile is something that you want to share with somebody else. So while those are the children too, I don't put those in that category unless they're old enough to know that you want to share it right now. So if they say yes, that's a share pile. But if it's a no, then keep it anyway. So the share pile, for example, of the share pile, and I do talk about this in the book, is that I gave his running watch to his running buddy that he ran with because his name was Mark. I wanted Mark to run with Rod, but more so, you could tell, don't get weird on me of what happens in the afterlife, but Rod can run with Mark. So in spirit, they were still together. I gave his bicycle to his brother who could do triathlons for him. I gave strategic things. I gave his guitar to my brother-in-law. I gave strategic things. So that's the share pile. Okay. And there always are things immediately that you want to share. And there's people at your doorstep waiting for them. And not because they're mean or they're rude or they're being, anything. They want a piece of your person as well. Whatever it may be, whether it's an in-law, my in-laws or a sibling or a friend, it's not that they're pushing you because they want those items. They just want a piece, they're sad too. So first pile is I'm going to keep. The second pile is I'm going to share. The third pile is a donation. But I just want to talk for a second about that. And the donation could be, it's not just like a donation to wherever you live, Goodwill, Salvation Army, Mission Church. It's a little bit more than that. It can be a donation to, maybe something to an auction that you might have, that can raise money for somebody else. I try, at least where I live, every fall, our cleaners does a coat drive. And what you do is if you donate the coats to them, then they clean them and they get them where they need to be. That is a meaningful to me donation. If you send it to one of those organizations that I spoke of earlier, it's still going to get in somebody's hands. But if you have the wherewithal and if you have a team member that can help sort, then I would suggest to do a little donation with meaning. The fourth pile is to sell. You're going to sell it because it's something that is sellable. In most cases, I've learned through my people and the people that I've worked with, it might be a car, it might be a second home, it might be a collection of stamps or coins or something like that. I have one woman that I've worked with, her husband died, she lived in Idaho, her husband died in an avalanche. And he had 3 in a snowmobile accident. He had 3 more snowmobiles. He had the trailer. He had a lot of other, what I'll call motorized sports and stuff to carry on it. She couldn't handle looking out the bedroom window with all of it in the garage. So she actually had an auction at her house for it. So however you want to sell it. I do when I'm in audiences and they say to me, well, I don't know how to be online. I'm like, well, your grandkids do, your neighbors do, your children do. I'm not telling you to go meet someone in your garage on Craigslist, but I'm saying there's ways of selling some of those things. So to repeat it again, for those that are driving right now listening, is the first thing we're going to do, we're going to keep it, we're going to share it, we're going to donate it, we're going to sell it. The fifth pile is what I call trash recycle, which should be very small, because even when you go through the office, all the little paper clips and anything else, those types of things, a lot of it can be recycled. I get a lot of questions in an audience from gentlemen that say, my wife was a crafter. Those can go anywhere. They could go to schools. They could go to after school. Well, right now they can't go anywhere. But when we reopen, they could go to schools. They could go to after school programs. They could go to, there's just so many places that stuff could go. There's so much creativity around using that. But the recycle / what I call trash, when I like to joke is that you could put the tidy whities in the trash. Nobody wants those. But the other stuff is that people do want to keep, or they should keep, or they want to get rid of. At least where I live, every weekend there's a shred-a-thon somewhere. Take the stuff there. So the most important pile, which is going to probably trigger some questions on your side, and we could get into it, I call it the ponder pile. I don't know what I want to do with it, but I don't want to derail the process. And I do in detail talk about how you decide whether it should be in a ponder pile or not in my book. But the real part of it is finding peace, one piece at a time is what it's titled, because that's what you have to do as you create your 6 piles. But your ponder pile is really just because it will derail if you, maybe it's the evening and you should derail, but in general, if you can't make a decision to put it in there. Now, if I was having a conversation with an organizer right now, they would say to me, Rachel, you can't put something in a ponder pile. I'm talking to my peeps. Put it in a ponder pile. What I will ask you, if I've come to your house to help you, I will ask you, or even if I do it virtually with you, I will say to you, can we just set a time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road, that we can rebox or do something with your ponder pile, just to revisit it, because what the decision that you may not want to make right now, you might be able to make later on.
Okay. And not wanting to get bogged down by those ponder pile things might bog you down on the ability to proceed with the rest of the items that maybe you could put into the other 5 piles.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. So those are the 6 piles. Thank you for going through those. You mentioned in the potential selling category or pile, a vehicle, a car, which reminds me that I actually just heard from a listener the other day who is thinking she might have to sell her husband's car. And I think you had some experience with this. Can you tell us about that?
So I really didn't have a lot of experience with my husband's car. My husband walked out of work and he actually climbed in his car and he kind of died in his car. Like that's where they pulled him out and he was on the ground. But I never wanted the car back. There was something gave me the heebie-jeebies with it. In my case, I remember a long time ago, my case was that my brother-in-law said that he would take the car. The beauty of it is that when I went to their house and I saw it, I got some warm fuzzies because it wasn't really gone. But cars are very difficult for people to release. I had a gentleman the other day that called me or reached out to me via email. I'll go back to the car, I promise. But he reached out and said to me he didn't know what to do with his wife's phone. And I thought he wanted to save her voicemail message, which is pretty easy right now because it's amazing to me how many people will pay $100 a month for a phone line because they just want to hear their voice. But there's ways of doing it that you could do it through your computer. But this guy said no, he didn't want to give up her number. He was afraid it would be reused. And so, because I even suggested to people that they'd go to a phantom voicemail. There's so many things that you could do. Anyway, but he didn't want to give up her voice or her telephone number. Going back to the cars, that's a hard one. Because some people, especially, when somebody, if it's a vintage car, that's one thing. But even when it's not a vintage car, it's not the process that's difficult. You do have to retitle. Depends on what state you're in. But sometimes you do have to retitle, which isn't a big process. The forms are online. But you do have to do that. But it's really the emotional piece of it is releasing. It's a visual that's huge. A shirt can get lost at a closet. A wedding ring can be fixed to put on your finger, your own finger. A car is, you pull in the garage. And I have to be honest that I was really sad when Rod's car wasn't in the garage. It just made you feel very single.
Mm.
When there's only one car there. It made you feel very single.
Right.
It's amazing what triggers, right?
Yeah. Well, and I recently traded my car for a smaller one, and even so, this wasn't involved in any kind of widow or loss type of stuff, but it was releasing those memories that I had with the prior car, right? With the family, with the trips, or with the day-to-day, right? And so I think when you layer in the memories with that person, in their car or the second family car or whatever, that just makes it that much more complex and emotion laden potentially.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, for sure.
Let's see. How are we doing here? Gosh, you're right. We could talk about this for an awfully long time, but I do think we're going to have to wrap it up fairly soon. You have another section called When Circumstances Are Not Straightforward. Are there a few things there that might be good to talk about?
Sure. So when I was writing the book, I felt like I was just, for all the widows that I've been with, I've been to over 20 camps at Camp Widow, and I just, ran my own group for 10 years. I've listened to a lot of widowers, and what I kept going back to was I felt like there was 90%, maybe 85% of people had similar challenges, but there always were some that were, you really had to think about, what do I do with this? How do I react to it? And I felt like it needed its own section in the book. So some of it, and this again, we could drive all the way from California to New York to discuss this, is what do you do with the pictures? And that was a section because I talk in detail of how to sort thin and what to do with the pictures. Another one is when you re-partner, is what do you do with it? Is it okay to leave some of the belongings from your previous marriage in different places of the house? And I do talk in detail. Yes, there is. You might not want to leave it on the mantle or by the bed, but there are definitely a place for those types of things. I talk about what happens when you find something that you were scared and you didn't want to find. And, maybe it's something of untruth, or maybe it's something of excitement that you can't share. But what happens when you have this emotion because you open a drawer and you find something good or bad? What do you do with that data point? Those are the types of things. Collections. I talk about collections because you keep them together or do you break them up? And sometimes it depends on the value, and sometimes it depends on your emotion. So I try to take some realistic things that weren't clothes, socks, shoes, garage tools, crafty things, some things that really made you, that may not fall in the magic of 6 piles, because photos don't fall into the magic of 6 piles. You could follow that process, but there's something about some of these items that you just couldn't generalize on them. Mm. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to address them. So I did put a chapter in there about that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, good. Thank you. Is there anything that we haven't covered here that you want to make sure to mention?
So I do try to, one of my challenges I have, and this isn't necessarily with this population, but it's a population of others, and maybe some of us have experienced it, even the younger widowers have experienced it. It's really difficult to go through someone else's possessions. So what I've learned is that I'm remarried, and I would never want my husband to really have to dig through my possessions. I want him to feel the love of sitting in the closet and feeling me and my jewelry and remembering where I wore this, there, and the other place. But I think I try to talk to my readers and my audiences about, it's up to us to be a little bit prepared. So not to compare yours and my story, but you had an illness. So there were some conversations that were had that I didn't have. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, No, I see.
Well, oh yeah, listeners can't see. I'm shaking my head. Yeah. So my husband was sick for 8 months, but actually from the very, very beginning, the way the brain cancer affected him, he wasn't participating in any discussions or sorting or bucket list stuff or anything.
So you and I are similar. However, your listeners, it is funny, you were shaking your head. The listeners may or may not have that. It depends, and that's sure. Why I'm suggesting we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Like I could go out for a run with my face mask on later, and I could trip and fall. So we can't really we don't know. So what I do try to do in the last chapter of the book is try to get a little bit organized. I'm not asking you to organize your life. That's not who I am. What I'm just saying is to try to just kind of think about, as you're sorting through your loved ones' possessions, think about your own as you're doing that. And when you stumble on some things when you're doing your spouses or your loved ones or your partners, think about your own if someone's to do it. And the number one thing I do, but I do this more with a different type of audience, is it is not your children's responsibility to do this. So for those of us that are the sandwich generation and we're helping our parents to, when they're alive, it's awesome because you get to know the story behind things. But when they're gone, you don't get to know and you lose that. That's not for today. That's for a different podcast for a different audience.
Well, and so this reminds me, though, you mentioned that you have a Rachel box in addition to the Rod box. And I think this maybe is where you're going with this. You've set some things aside for people to remember you at some point. So
it's not remember me. It's really stuff that remember, I've just been talking to you for 45 minutes and I'm telling you how to clean, organize, whatever. There is still stuff that I am not ready to throw out. And I get questions. It's being in my inbox is pretty fun because people ask me really personal questions. But so what's in my box? I have my diplomas. You can get them online. I can scan them, put them on my computer. I don't know. I like that little blue box that says William H. Hall High School, West Hartford, Connecticut. I don't know why. I like it. I never look at it. I have my college ring and my high school ring in there. Never wore them, never cared about it. Really thrilled that my daughter never got a leather jacket because that was even worth more money. I mean, less money, whatever. What I have in there is some bizarre things. And there's just stuff that I'm not ready to get rid of, even though I'm telling you to prepare if, say, something happens to you. The box isn't that big. Amazon would call it a small box. And I have on the top of it, Rachel's stuff, toss when I die.
Huh.
So I know my nosy daughter will look in there, but there's nothing really exciting in there. But it was just stuff that I'm not ready to get rid of. And my Rachel box is sitting next to my Rod box, although Rod has a much nicer box because it's plastic. And, mine is just a cardboard box with, stuff in it.
Yeah. But then, somebody who does look at that down the road when you die gets a window into what was important to you or what the kinds of things you wanted to hold on to and maybe periodically look at.
And again, I don't know if it was important to me. It just was something that I couldn't toss. Like so many things that I can toss, but I couldn't toss that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Just, we all have our different ways, right? And that's the real point of this. And that if somebody were to walk away with something, just because somebody does it some way doesn't mean you have to do it the same way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was about to ask next, actually, as a wrap-up question, if you could say one thing to listeners about this whole topic, what would it be? Maybe you've just answered that for us.
No, I'm going to give you another one because I have to give you the whole farm. Okay. So the number one thing is, for me, is telling a story. So what I suggest is, if it's part of the story, keep it. If it's not part of the story, don't keep it. See, I get to see your face. Everybody else doesn't get to see your face. There was a pondering going on. It was awesome. Is it part of the story? Then we keep it. Okay. So for me, with Rod, things that are in the box are part of his story. Okay. His mother has given me things since he's passed, but those have become my daughter. I've given them to my daughter. So it's still part of his story, but it's a little bit different. I was able to release things and to continue to release things over the years if it wasn't a connection or a story to me. And I feel that, like, my mom died to go up in a generation, she died many years ago. The same thing. Keep the items that tell your story. You don't have to keep everything else.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, actually, I think that's a perfect place to end. So my guest today is Rachel Kodanaz, widowed parent and author of Finding Peace, One Piece at a Time. So Rachel, where can listeners find you and find your books if they'd like to learn more about your work?
So my website, difficult name, rachelkodanaz.com, RACHELKODANAZ, or you Google and it'll hopefully autocorrect that. On there, you could get my books. You could actually email me my contact information. I love hearing questions of certain things that people don't know what to do with, and I would help you solve those. Also help you clean out if that's organized and thin. We'll use the word thin if that's something of interest. My books are on there, but you could get everything on Amazon as well.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Rachel, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Rachel Kodanaz as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 77. And today, a great big shout out to all of my listeners in Colorado. In honor of today's guest, Rachel is in Colorado herself. I hope that if you are close enough to Judy's house, that you guys in Colorado will check out their programs. They have terrific programs there. I love talking with them back in episode 43. And if you do live in Colorado, check that out and see if it's something that you might be interested in. And even if you're not nearby, if you're not in Colorado, we had a terrific discussion in that episode about this thing they do called the CBEM, the CBEM, Childhood Bereavement Estimation Model, which is a fancy name for a bunch of really deep statistical research that sheds light on how prevalent the problem of childhood grief is. And kind of the bottom line statistic they came up with is that 1 in 14 kids will experience the death of a parent or a sibling by the time they turn 18. And they also have, so that's a US-wide number, and if you go on their website, they've got numbers broken down by state and community as well. So, again, if you are in Colorado, please do check out Judy's house. So let's see, what else today? I just got an email from the merch store over at TeePublic, and they announced that they're having a sale on all mugs on July 13th and 14th. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, there's t-shirts and other things, but the mugs are all going to be on sale, and so you could pick up a Widowed Parents Rock mug for yourself or someone you know, and support the podcast and have enjoy having your coffee in that in the morning. So I wanted to make sure to tell you guys about that. Also, wanted to let you know that you can now support the podcast on Patreon. So if you have been enjoying it or finding it useful or interesting, or if the podcast has been helpful to you as a new widowed parent or as a not so new widowed parent, I'd ask you to please go over and consider supporting it. There's a cost every month to run this, and I would be very much appreciate any support that you could provide. All right, hey, what else? Let's see. So I love hearing from listeners. I've gotten a number of emails this week actually from different listeners. Sometimes they ask questions. Sometimes listeners will make a suggestion of a topic that might be good to cover on the show, something I haven't covered yet. Sometimes maybe it's just a question of, do I know of a resource for this or that? And shoot me an email. If I can help, I'd love to. So I think that's all for today. So as always, thank you for listening. And until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.